I stood in the middle of a ballroom, 8 months pregnant, 400 people around me, crystal glasses, champagne, chandeliers that made everything look golden, and my husband's arm was rising, not for the first time. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I looked him in the eyes. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't afraid because I had made a decision. And tonight, that decision was about to become real. What happened in that room changed everything. Not just for me, for him, for our daughter who hadn't even been born yet, for the life I thought I was supposed to have, and the one I was finally going to build. This is the story of how a woman who had everything on paper walked away from all of it, and how losing the perfect life was the only way she ever found her real one. Stay with me, because the moment the lights went out on his world is when mine truly began. Lesson line. The most dangerous prison is the one you build yourself, out of hope, out of silence, out of love given to the wrong person. If this story speaks to something you've carried quietly, a doubt, a moment you ignored your own instincts, you're not alone. Hit like so this reaches someone who needs to hear it. Now, drop a comment below. I read every single one. Share this with a friend who deserves to know their own worth. And subscribe, because every story here is chosen for one reason: to remind you that you are more than what you survived.
The sound hit first. Not the music, not the laughter, not the clink of crystal champagne flutes, or the soft murmur of 400 wealthy people congratulating themselves on attending the Hargrove Foundation's annual gala. The sound that hit first was Douglas's voice, low, controlled, the way a blade sounds before it finds skin. Don't embarrass me. Claire Weston Hargrove stood very still in the center of the Caldwell Grand Ballroom. 8 months pregnant, wearing a midnight blue gown that cost more than her first car. Her hands rested on the curve of her belly, a gesture she had developed without thinking, her palms curving around her daughter without being asked. Around her, the party continued. Servers in white gloves moved through the crowd. A string quartet played something elegant and forgettable in the corner. Chandeliers hung overhead, warm and impossibly golden, the kind of light that makes everything look like a painting. And Douglas stood 3 feet away from her. His jaw was tight. His eyes were flat. There was a smile on his face for the crowd. But Claire knew, she had always known, that the smile never reached those eyes. Not even in the beginning. She told herself once that it was just his way. Reserved, serious. Successful men were often that way. She had been wrong. "I'm not embarrassing you," she said quietly. Her voice was steady. She had practiced being steady for 3 years. "I was talking to Senator Marsh. I was being polite." "You were telling him about the Foundation's water initiative," Douglas said. His smile did not waver. "I told you last week. The water initiative announcement is mine. The timing is mine. You don't just—" "Douglas." Her voice dropped even lower. "I'm carrying your daughter. I've been on my feet for 2 hours. I just wanted to—" "Claire." One word. The way you say it, to a dog that won't sit. Something shifted in the room. She would think about this later, much later, when everything had already happened, and she was sitting in a different kind of chair in a different kind of room, trying to put language to what she had sensed in that moment. What she sensed was this. The room had changed texture, not obviously, not dramatically. The 4 or 5 guests closest to them had shifted almost imperceptibly, turned a few degrees, like sunflowers moving toward light. Except in reverse, moving toward something cold and very bright. She didn't understand it then. She would. Douglas stepped forward. His right arm came up. Not a wave, not a gesture. An arm drawn back, with the kind of economy that tells you it has been here before, that this is not a first time. Claire did not flinch. She did not step back. She looked at his face, and she thought, clearly, without panic, I am done. She thought, my daughter will never see this. She thought, this is the last night I spend afraid. And then the room exploded. Not the way rooms explode when someone drops a glass or a fire alarm sounds. This was different. This was choreographed, precise. 140 people in evening gowns and tuxedos reached into pockets, evening bags, jacket liners. 140 hands produced identical credentials, gold and navy, held open in the warm chandelier light. FBI. The voice came from everywhere at once. Douglas Hargrove, you are under arrest. Douglas Hargrove froze. 45 years old, worth $4.3 billion on paper, and standing here with his arm midair, the momentum leaving his body slowly, like air leaving a balloon. The string quartet stopped playing, and Claire stood in the center of the room, her hands on her daughter, watching her husband's world collapse around him like a building brought down from the inside. Every support beam removed at once, every pillar gone, the whole structure falling sideways in the particular slow-motion way of things that have been hollow for a very long time. She didn't cry. She didn't even breathe. She just stood there, still. While the room moved and flashed and filled with voices and command, a woman appeared at her elbow, medium height, cool dark eyes, wearing a navy evening gown that Claire had assumed all evening was just an expensive purchase. Mrs. Hargrove, the woman said. Her voice was quiet and precise. I'm Special Agent Dana Sutton. We spoke on the phone last month. A pause. Are you all right? Claire looked at her. Then she looked at Douglas, at the handcuffs, the agents converging, the way his jaw worked without sound. Yes, Claire said. Her voice was absolutely steady. I think I finally am. The story begins 3 months before that night. 3 months before the ballroom, before the badges, before everything changed. It begins on an ordinary Tuesday morning in a house that was never quite a home. 3 months before the gala, Claire Weston Hargrove stood at the kitchen island at 6:45 in the morning, watching her husband drink his coffee. She did this sometimes, watched him, tried to find the man she had married. That morning, she could not find him. Douglas stood at the window. He was immaculate, as always. Dark suit, gray tie, shoes that caught the light. He was on his phone, always on his phone, and the low murmur of his voice moved through the kitchen like water moving under ice. Claire looked down at her belly. 7 months and 1 week, her daughter kicked once, twice, the familiar flutter just under her rib. She pressed her palms there. She said silently, I know something is wrong too. She was not the kind of woman who invented problems. She had been an environmental consultant for 9 years before she married Douglas. Fieldwork in 3 states. Impact reports that held up in court. She had sat across conference tables from oil company lawyers and did not blink. She was not, by any definition, the kind of woman who imagined things. What she had noticed in the past 6 weeks, Douglas came home late, 4 nights out of 7. Not unusual. He always came home late, but the quality of the lateness had changed. It was different, absent instead of busy. He used to come home wound up, talking about pitches and acquisitions, pacing and dictating notes. Now he came home empty, quiet in a way that had no room in it for her. His phone had a new passcode. He flinched once, briefly, when she walked up behind him while he was on a call. He smelled different, not dramatically, just a slight shift, like a room that's been aired out. She told herself, You're 8 months pregnant. Your hormones are extraordinary. You're reading into things. She told herself, he's under stress. The company is in its biggest acquisition. But the morning light hit the kitchen tile. Douglas ended his call and turned from the window and looked at her, and for just one moment she saw it. Distance. Not the distance of a busy man, the distance of a man who has already left the building, who is staying out of obligation, who looks at his pregnant wife and feels nothing. She looked down at her coffee cup, cold already. She thought, I know. She thought, I have known for weeks. She thought, the hardest part is admitting I knew from the beginning. Douglas set his phone face down on the counter. I'll be late again tonight, he said. Okay, she said. No argument, no question. She had learned, 3 months into their marriage, that questions were treated as accusations, and accusations brought a cold silence that could last for days. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, the automatic kind, the kind that means I am fulfilling an obligation, and left. The front door closed. The house settled around her. Claire set her coffee cup in the sink. She stood very still for a moment, one hand on the counter, one hand on her belly. She thought, Nora has been telling me for 2 years. She thought, my mother has been telling me for 3. She walked to the window. Outside, Douglas's black SUV was pulling smoothly out of the driveway, the way money moves, effortlessly, without friction, leaving no mark. She watched it go. She said, very quietly, out loud, what are you hiding? The house did not answer. 3 days later, it didn't have to. The message was from a number not saved in her phone. It had come to the house account, the shared household email, the one Douglas set up when they moved in together, for utility bills and grocery delivery and the occasional vendor invoice from the foundation. He had forgotten it was shared, or he had never thought she checked it. Claire stood in the kitchen with her laptop open and read the message 3 times. Running late tonight. Don't text the regular number. Miss you already. No name, no context, just those 4 sentences. And beneath them, an attachment, a photograph. She did not open the photograph. She sat down slowly in the kitchen chair. She sat the way you sit when you have just been told something your body already knows, but your mind has been refusing to process. Heavy, careful, like your bones might crack. She thought, here it is. She thought, I was right, and I wish I had been wrong. She thought, now what? She picked up her phone. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock, lock. She set it face down on the counter. She picked it up again. She searched. Signs your spouse is cheating. She stared at the results for a long time. Then she closed the browser. Not yet. But she knew. She had known. The search results just confirmed what her body had been telling her for weeks. She picked up her phone one more time and called Nora. Nora picked up on the second ring. I was waiting for this call, Nora said. No preamble, no softening. That was Nora. Tell me everything, Claire said. So she told her. Nora listened without interrupting, without making sympathetic sounds. She was the kind of friend who knows that sometimes the person talking needs the silence more than the response. When Claire finished, Nora said, Okay, I love you, and I need you to listen to what I'm about to say without getting defensive. Okay, Claire said. I never trusted him, Nora said. Claire closed her eyes. Nora. I know. I bit my tongue for 3 years, but, Claire, Nora's voice was steady. I watched him at your wedding, the way he looked at you during the vows, like you were an asset he was acquiring, not a person he was choosing. A pause. You deserve to be chosen. You know that, right? She did not know that. She had spent 3 years trying to earn it. What do I do? Claire asked. First, Nora said, you don't confront him yet. Not until you know more. Because men like Douglas, they don't confess, they redirect, they gaslight. He'll make this about your insecurity, your hormones. So first you find out how deep this goes. And then? Claire asked. And then you protect yourself, Nora said. And that baby. After she hung up, Claire sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The house hummed around her, ice maker cycling, refrigerator running. The soft sound of a 4,000 square foot house that had never, not once, felt like a home. She thought about when she had stopped feeling at home here. It was not a sudden thing. It had been gradual, like low tide. You don't notice the water leaving until you look up and find yourself standing on bare sand, surrounded by things the sea left behind. She set her hands flat on the table. She breathed. And then she opened her laptop again and started looking at the company's public filings. She was an environmental consultant. She knew how to read documents. She knew what clean numbers looked like. She knew what buried numbers looked like. What she found in the first 20 minutes made her hands go cold. The Hargrove Foundation, the charitable arm of Douglas's empire, the one with the galas and the press releases and the senators' dinners, had moved $11 million in the last 18 months, in, then out, then in again, through a series of sub-accounts that linked back to an LLC registered in Delaware, which linked to a holding company in the Cayman Islands. She was not a forensic accountant, but she knew enough to know that clean money does not move like this. She stared at the screen. She thought, it's not just an affair. She thought, it's worse than an affair. She thought, my daughter and I are living inside a crime. She ran a bath. Not to relax, just to have somewhere to put herself. She sat in the warm water, her belly a small island above the surface. Outside the bathroom window, a bird was singing. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what her life felt like before this house. She could almost get there. Almost. She didn't sleep that night. At 2:47 in the morning, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen, writing down everything she had found, making a timeline, a list of questions. She was the kind of woman who made lists when the world was falling apart. Her mother had taught her that. When things go sideways, Beverly Weston always said, you make a list. Because a list means you are still thinking, and as long as you are still thinking, you are still in control. Claire made her list. At 4 in the morning, she picked up her phone and searched, how to report financial fraud to the FBI. She looked at the results for a long time, then she closed the browser. Not yet. She needed to know more first. She needed to understand what she was holding before she handed it to someone else. But she had made a decision. Sitting in the dark kitchen, her belly pressed against the table edge, her daughter sleeping beneath her ribs, she was going to get out. And she was going to make sure Douglas didn't take everything with him on his way down. The next morning, she watched Douglas again at breakfast, this time with different eyes. He was the same. That was the unsettling thing, absolutely, perfectly the same. The suit, the coffee, the phone face down on the counter, the way he moved through the kitchen with the ease of a man who has never questioned whether he belongs somewhere. But she looked at him now and felt it like temperature, cold. This man was a stranger. Not because he had changed, because she was finally seeing him accurately. She thought of something Nora had said once, years before Douglas. The red flags are never hidden, Claire. We just decide to call them something else. She had called his coldness emotional reserve. She had called his control protectiveness. She had called his contempt high standards. She stood at the kitchen window and watched him drink his coffee, and she thought, who is this person? How did I share a bed with someone I don't know? How did I have his child? He looked up, caught her watching. You okay? He asked. Automatic. Fine, she said. Also automatic. He nodded, mumbled, and went back to his phone. That was their marriage in 12 seconds. She walked to the living room. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the perfectly decorated space, neutral tones, modern art, everything Douglas had chosen, everything placed by a decorator she had met exactly once. There was nothing of her in this house, not one single thing. She said it out loud, quietly, but out loud. There is nothing of me here. The words landed differently when spoken. Heavier, truer. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed. His bed. She always thought of it as his bed, even after 3 years. She opened her laptop and looked again at the financial documents. She needed a second opinion. She had dated a forensic accountant once, early 20s, long before Douglas. His name was Peter, and he had been kind and methodical, and she had eventually moved on, but she still remembered, clearly, how he explained money laundering to her one rainy Sunday afternoon, how he spread papers across his kitchen table and pointed at the patterns, how he said, clean money doesn't zigzag, only dirty money needs to hide. What she was looking at zigzagged, badly. Sub-accounts, holding companies, shell corporations registered in states where filing requirements were minimal, charitable disbursements that flowed out, and then, somehow, through 3 or 4 intermediary accounts, flowed back in through different channels. She printed 23 pages. She folded them carefully. She put them in the zippered interior pocket of her maternity bag, the bag she brought to every prenatal appointment. Douglas had never once looked inside that bag. She drove to the pharmacy for prenatal vitamins. She sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes before going inside. She could not make herself get out of the car. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel, staring at the pharmacy door, thinking about every mundane task that had composed her life here. Pharmacy runs, dry cleaning pickups, foundation event RSVPs, managing caterers and donor lists and venue contract. Every single one had been in service of a life that was never actually hers. She thought about the apartment she had left in Portland, the bookcase from a salvage market, the kitchen table from a woman who was moving to Spain, the orange couch that no one had ever liked except her. She had sold the orange couch. Douglas had said, "My place is bigger. It makes more sense." "You can consult from here." She had said yes. Because she loved him, because she thought love meant fitting yourself into the shape of another person's life. She understood now that love was not that, but 3 years ago, she had not yet learned the lesson. She finally got out of the car. She bought the vitamins. She sat in the driver's seat afterward and did not start the engine. She almost missed the folder. It was tucked behind the filing cabinet in Douglas's home office. Not in it, behind it, pushed flat against the wall, in the narrow gap between the cabinet and the baseboard. A blue folder, unlabeled. She had gone into his office to find a vendor contract she needed for a foundation invoice. She had bumped the cabinet, moving a box, and the folder had slipped. She picked it up. She opened it. Inside, a stack of photographs, her husband, a woman she didn't recognize, a restaurant she had never been taken to, a hotel lobby, a marina somewhere warm. The photographs were dated 8 months ago, 2 weeks after their daughter was conceived. She stood very still in the home office. The air conditioning was running. She could hear the tick of Douglas's desk clock, the distant sound of traffic outside. She closed the folder. She put it back exactly where she had found it. Exactly the same angle, the same position. Then she walked to the kitchen. She sat down. She set her hands on the table. She breathed. She thought, I need a name. Alzalmk. Her name was Renee Caldwell. Claire found her in 40 minutes online. 31 years old, event coordinator, Professional photographs on her company website showing a woman who was warm and competent and completely ordinary, beautiful in the way that made Claire feel nothing. Not jealousy, not contempt, just a flat, tired recognition that this was the oldest story in the world and she was apparently living it. Renee's LinkedIn showed she worked for a firm that coordinated corporate events, including, Claire noticed, 3 of the Hargrove Foundation's last 4 galas. Of course, she closed the laptop. She had expected to feel devastated, the kind of pain that makes it impossible to breathe. She had been bracing against it all morning, like a person waiting for a wave. But the wave did not come. What came instead was something quieter, more interior. Not grief for Douglas, not rage at the other woman. Grief for herself. For the woman who had sat across a dinner table from Douglas Hargrove 3.5 years ago in a restaurant in San Francisco and thought, this is the one. This man sees me. She had been so certain. She had been 32 different kinds of wrong. She pressed her palm against her belly. I'm so sorry, she said quietly. Not to him, not even to herself, to her daughter, to the small, fierce creature she was bringing into the world, who deserved better than a mother who had disappeared into someone else's life. I'm done disappearing, she said, and then her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She did. Mrs. Hargrove. The voice was calm and direct. Male. Professional. My name is Agent Marcus Webb. I'm with the FBI, Financial Crimes Division. I've been trying to reach you for 6 weeks. Is now a safe time to speak? Silence. Claire looked down at her belly. Then she said, very quietly, How did you know I was ready? A brief pause on the other end. Because, Agent Webb said carefully, 3 days ago, you accessed the Foundation's public financial filings from a device registered in your name. For the first time in 3 years. Another pause. That told us something important. What did it tell you? She asked. That you were starting to see it too, he said. She met Agent Webb the following Tuesday, not at a field office. He had been thoughtful about that. A small conference room in a neutral law firm downtown. Not hers, not his. He brought a colleague, Agent Sutton. Sharp eyes, said very little in that first meeting. Claire brought Nora, who had driven up from Palo Alto at 5 a.m. and arrived with 2 coffees and no commentary about the hour. You should have a lawyer, Agent Webb had said on the phone. I'll get one, Claire said. After I hear what you know. He was younger than she expected. Early 40s, brown hair going gray at the temples, the kind of face that gave away nothing but communicated everything. He laid a file on the table. How much do you know about your husband's company? He asked. More than he thinks, she said. A small, satisfied nod. He had expected this. Your husband has been moving money through the Hargrove Foundation for approximately 2 years, he said. We estimate the total at somewhere between $40 and $60 million. The money originates from 3 sources: inflated government contracts, investor fraud, and payments from at least 2 foreign entities with questionable legal status. Claire kept her face perfectly still. She thought, $40 to $60 million. She thought, he sat across from me at breakfast and I did not know. She thought, I lived inside this. The Foundation events, Agent Sutton said, specifically the galas, have been used as a cover for in-person exchanges of information and, in 2 instances, physical transfer of funds. The galas, Claire said. Yes, Agent Sutton replied. The ones I organized, Claire said. A pause. The invitations go through you, Webb said carefully. The vendor coordination, the donor lists. Yes, her voice was steady, which means my name is on everything, which is part of why we wanted to speak with you, Webb said. She looked at him, He held her gaze. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, "we're not here because we suspect you. We're here because we believe you're the person most likely to help us end this." The room was quiet. Outside, traffic moved past. Ordinary city sounds. Someone laughing somewhere down the hall. The world continuing on its ordinary axis. She thought about the orange couch. She thought about Portland. She thought about Margaret Harlow, her supervisor at the consulting firm, the morning she had called to say she was moving to San Francisco. Margaret had been quiet for a moment. Then she had said, "Claire, are you certain you're not giving up more than you're gaining?" She had said yes. Absolutely. She had been wrong. She thought about the apartment. A bookshelf full of books she had actually read. A neighborhood she knew block by block. A coffee shop where they knew her order and asked about her weekend. She had traded all of it for a 4,000 square foot house in a neighborhood where she did not know her neighbors' names. She had told herself it was love. She understood now it had also been fear. Fear that if she didn't take this, the security, the status, the man who said, "I need you here," she might not be chosen again. Might not be enough? Douglas had known this about her. She was almost certain of it now. He had a gift for identifying the exact weight a person carried, pressing on it gently with 2 fingers until they tilted toward him. She pressed her palm flat on the conference table. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Webb leaned forward slightly. "We have one more event, the annual gala, 6 weeks from now. We believe Douglas is planning another in-person fund transfer, larger than the previous ones." He paused. "We want to use that event as the closing operation." "You want me to be there," Claire said. "We want you to be exactly as you've been," Webb said. "Go to the foundation events. Take the vendor calls. Be present. Don't change anything. Be his wife," she said. Webb held her gaze. "For 6 more weeks," he said. She sat with that. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of being the woman she had been practicing to be for 3 years. The composed wife, the competent organizer, the one who smiled and asked the right questions and made everything run smoothly. Except now she would be doing it for a completely different reason. She looked at Agent Sutton. "The woman in the photographs," she said. "Renee Caldwell." Sutton's expression shifted very slightly. "Ms. Caldwell has been made aware of the investigation," she said. "She came to you," Claire said. It wasn't a question. A pause. 3 months ago," Webb said quietly. "She didn't know about the financial crimes. She believed, she had been told, that she was working with a man in the process of divorcing his wife." He paused. "She was lied to, Mrs. Hargrove, in a different way than you were lied to, but just as completely." Claire sat with this. She had expected to hate Renee Caldwell. She had expected the clean, satisfying fury of a clear target. Instead, she felt complicated, the way you feel when you realize the person you wanted as an enemy was also, in a different way, a victim. "She'll testify?" Claire asked. "Yes," Webb said. She nodded. After the meeting, Claire walked out of the law firm. She did not go to her car. She walked 2 blocks to a coffee shop she had never been to and ordered chamomile tea. She sat by the window. Outside, the city moved in its ordinary way. People walking dogs, someone arguing on a phone, a child pointing at a pigeon. She wrapped both hands around the warm cup. For 4 full minutes, she just sat and watched the street and breathed. The steam from the tea rose and dissipated. The city went about its business. She thought, "This is the last cup of tea I drink as a woman who doesn't know what she's doing next." After today, she knew. In the car, Nora was in the passenger seat. "So," Nora said. "So," Claire replied. "The FBI." "The FBI." Nora blew out a long breath. "Okay. I've been biting my tongue for 3 years, and now I'm going to speak. She turned in her seat. You are the smartest, most capable person I have ever known. You know environmental regulations like you know your own reflection. You survived Margaret Harlow, which most people do not survive. You are 8 months pregnant, and you are sitting here being calm and functional. Her voice cracked slightly. I have never been more scared for you or more proud of you at the same time. Claire looked out the windshield. I need a lawyer, she said. I know a lawyer, Nora said. Of course you do. Sandra Holt, family law, Berkeley, takes 0. Nora stopped herself. 0 nonsense. You'll love her. Claire started the car. He had another woman, she said, pulling out of the parking space. Renee Caldwell, event coordinator. She worked on 3 of the foundation galas. Nora said nothing. Were you going to tell me you knew? A very long pause. I suspected, Nora said finally. I didn't know. There's a difference. Another pause. I thought about telling you 100 times. But you were pregnant and you seemed... I seemed fine, Claire said. You seemed fine, Nora said. A moment of silence filled the car. I'm not fine, Claire said. I know, Nora said, but I'm going to be. I know that too, Nora said. I've always known that. Sandra Holt was exactly what Nora had promised. 48 years old, compact, close-cropped silver hair, the kind of direct eye contact that tells you immediately she is not going to waste your time or hers. She wore no jewelry except small pearl studs and a watch built for function over fashion. She met Claire at her office on a Thursday afternoon. Her first 3 sentences were, sit down, tell me everything, including things you think are irrelevant, especially those things. So Claire told her everything. Sandra took notes in a small notebook, old-fashioned, with a pen she clearly favored. She did not react to anything emotionally, not the photographs, not the FBI financial documents, not the FBI meeting. She absorbed information the way a good judge does, with total stillness. When Claire finished, Sandra looked at her notes for a moment. You're 8 months pregnant, Sandra said. Yes, Claire replied. And you're still living in the house, Sandra said. For now, Claire said. I need to be careful about how I leave. If I move out suddenly, he'll know something is happening. Sandra nodded slowly. The FBI has made a similar request, I imagine. They don't want him spooked before they have what they need. Yes, Claire said. What is their timeline? Sandra asked. 6 weeks. There's an event. The annual gala. Agent Webb believes it's being used for another in-person transfer. They want to use it as the closing operation. Sandra set down her pen. That's 6 weeks away. You'll be 2 weeks from your due date. I know, Claire said. Claire. I know. She met Sandra's eyes. I also know that if I leave now, Douglas's lawyers will bury the financial evidence before the FBI can reach it. He has 4 attorneys on retainer. If I give him warning, he will protect himself and come after me, and my daughter will grow up watching her father escape consequences for $40 million of fraud and a marriage he treated like a business transaction. Sandra was quiet. I'm not doing this for me, Claire said. I'm doing it because I will not let him be her father without her knowing exactly who he is. Another silence. Then Sandra said, All right, then let's make sure you're protected. She spent the next 2 weeks building a case. Sandra prepared the divorce filing, to be submitted the morning after the gala. Agent Webb walked her through what the next 6 weeks would look like: the surveillance, the documentation, her role, which was limited to one thing: remaining normal. Just keep being exactly who you've been, he said. Go to the foundation events, take the vendor calls, be present, don't change anything. Be his wife, she said. For 6 more weeks, he said. She went home and cooked dinner. She sat across from Douglas at a table that cost $12,000, in a kitchen that had never once felt like hers. She watched him eat and talk about his day. She smiled at the right moments, asked the right questions. She thought, "You have no idea." She thought, "You never knew who you were sitting across from." She thought, "I was invisible to you. That is your greatest mistake." That night, she lay in bed listening to Douglas breathe. He fell asleep in exactly 7 minutes. He always had. She had spent 3 years memorizing the map of him, where he slept, how he moved, the smell of his soap. She had thought that was what love was, building a complete encyclopedia of another person. Now she lay there in the dark and thought, I could leave tonight, and he would not even stir. On a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks before the gala, she called her mother. Beverly Weston answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," her mother said. "You've had that sound in your voice for 2 months." "What sound?" Claire asked. "The sound you make when you're managing something alone and trying not to let me know," Beverly said. Claire sat in the small upstairs reading room, a room Douglas called the library, but was really just 4 shelves of books he had never read, placed there because a decorator suggested it. She had started spending her evenings here, away from him, hiding in plain sight. "Mom," she said, "I need to tell you something." She told her. Her mother was quiet through all of it. When Claire finished, Beverly said, "He raised his hand to you?" "Not yet," Claire said. "But I've seen him start to. 3 times. He catches himself." "He won't always catch himself," Beverly said. "No," Claire said. "Claire." Her mother's voice shifted. Not the practical voice, the underneath voice, the one that only came out in serious moments. "Are you scared?" Claire thought about lying. Then she thought about her daughter. "Yes," she said. "But I'm not letting the fear make decisions for me. Not this time." A long pause. Then Beverly said, "I should have told you. When you called to say you were leaving Portland, I should have said, 'Wait, think. Don't trade your life for a man's convenience.'" "You did say that," Claire said. "I said it once. I should have said it 30 times. Mom." "I'm coming out there," Beverly said. "You don't have to. "I'm coming out there, Claire. In 3 weeks. You are having my grandchild, and you are dismantling a criminal, and you are doing it while 8 months pregnant. And you are not doing that last part without me in the building." Claire laughed. It surprised her. She had not laughed in weeks. The laugh was small and ragged, and it turned, briefly, into something that was not a laugh. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll book my flight tonight," Beverly said. After the call, Claire walked to the window in the reading room. The city lights were below. San Francisco at night, soft and golden. She stood for 4 minutes with her hands on her belly. She did not think about Douglas. She thought about her daughter, about what she was going to name her. She had decided Marin, after her grandmother, a woman who had left a bad situation at 40 with 3 children and never looked back, who had taught Beverly that endurance is not the same as strength. And Beverly had taught Claire the same thing. Now Claire would teach Marin. She said the name quietly, Marin. Her daughter kicked. That Thursday, Agent Webb called with a development neither of them had anticipated. Douglas had moved up an exchange date. Not the gala, something before it, a meeting in the house in 4 days. "We need you out of the house by 7:30, Webb said. "I'll be out by 7, Claire said. She called Nora. She packed a bag. She drove to Nora's hotel. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed and watched the clock. At 9:14, Webb texted, "Documents secured. 2 individuals in custody. All clear." She stared at the text for a long time. She texted back, "And Douglas? Not present." The meeting was his associate's. He was in Palo Alto. She put the phone down, and then she felt it. Not rage, not devastation, the slow, settling weight of cold clarity. Because she had known, she had suspected, that Douglas would not be at the meeting himself. He was too careful for that. That was the thing about men like Douglas. They let other people hold the things that could burn them. They stayed clean. They stood at galas in beautiful suits and raised money for water initiatives and kissed their pregnant wives on the forehead and smiled at senators. They were not dramatic. They were not monsters. They were just small. She went online that night and looked up the orange couch, not the actual couch. She knew it was gone, long gone. She looked up the type. The color, the style. She searched. Amber orange, mid-century, sofa, vintage. She found one on a resale website in Oakland. She looked at it for 11 minutes. Then she closed the browser. But she noted the listing number. She wrote it in her notebook, on the same page as Sandra Holt's phone number and Agent Webb's direct line. The listing number for the orange couch, sandwiched between her two most important allies. She thought, I am already building something. 3 days later, she and Douglas had the conversation she had been building toward for weeks. Not about the FBI, not yet. About the affair. She had calculated this carefully. She needed to have the confrontation without revealing how much she actually knew. She needed his words without tipping her hand. She laid it out at the kitchen table. The email, the photograph folder, the spare phone she had found behind the toilet 3 weeks ago, photographed, serial number and all, then returned to exactly where she found it. No accusation, no tears. She put the evidence on the table, piece by piece, the way a card player lays down a hand. Then she sat back and waited. Douglas stared at the items on the table. For a very long moment, he said nothing. She had expected deflection. She had expected DNRVO, deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. She had expected him to make it about her jealousy, her insecurity, her pregnancy hormones. Instead, he sighed. A long, quiet, exhausted sigh. Like a man setting down something heavy. I was going to tell you, he said. She said nothing. After the baby, he said, I was going to tell you it wasn't working. Claire looked at him. It wasn't working, she repeated. I'm sorry, Claire. His voice was even, professional, the voice he used on difficult calls. I care about you, but it hasn't been what it should be, for a while. She thought, he is confessing to the affair as a distraction from everything else. She thought, he thinks this is the worst thing I know. He was wrong. You're not going to yell, he said. Almost a question. No, she said. He blinked. She saw something flicker across his face. Discomfort at the unexpected. He knew how to handle screaming. He knew how to handle tears. He did not know what to do with this. Calm, still, cold. What do you want to do? He asked. She folded her hands on the table. I want to get through the gala, she said. It's 3 weeks away. The foundation needs it to run smoothly. After that, we'll discuss next steps. He stared at her. That's it? He asked. That's it, she said. Something moved through his face. Relief. The relief of a man who expects punishment and is handed a reprieve. He had no idea the reprieve was a cage door closing. Okay, he said. He picked up his coffee cup. He went back to his phone. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of her life. Renee Caldwell, $40 million. And Douglas Hargrove sat at his $12,000 table and went back to his phone. She got up, her hand on her belly. She walked out of the kitchen. She walked to the reading room. She sat down. She said, very quietly, My God, he is so small. Not a monster, not a villain from a story where the evil is large and obvious and worthy of the pain it causes. Just a man, small and selfish and careful. Just a coward with excellent suits and an $11,000 watch. He never loved me, she thought. He loved what I made possible. The appearances, the competence, the cover. She said it out loud, very quietly, to the empty room. I was not a wife. I was infrastructure. She sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Renee Caldwell. She had not told Agent Webb, had not told Sandra, had certainly not told Nora, who would have opinions. She called because she needed to hear it. From another woman who had been inside Douglas's gravity and been pulled out of herself by it. Renee picked up after 2 rings. Her voice was weary and exhausted, the voice of someone who has been dreading and expecting this call in equal measure. I know who you are, Renee said, not unkindly. I know who you are too, Claire said. A pause. I'm not calling to fight, Claire said. I don't have the energy, and I don't have the anger. Not for you. I didn't know he was still... Renee stopped. He told me you were separated. I know, Claire said. I'm so sorry, Renee said. Claire was quiet for a moment. He does that, she said finally. He tells people what they need to hear. He's very good at it. Yes, a pause. He told me you were cold, that you'd been distant since before the pregnancy. Claire thought about the orange couch, about Margaret Harlow, about Portland. I was lonely, she said. That's what he called cold. Renee made a sound. Not quite a sob, something smaller, more compressed. I'm testifying, Renee said. I'm cooperating fully. I have emails, I have records of payments through the foundation that I helped coordinate without knowing what they were. I know, Claire said. Thank you. Another silence. Will she be okay? Renee asked. The baby. Claire set her hand on her belly. Yes, she said. We're going to be just fine. She meant it. For the first time in months, maybe years, she meant it completely. That night, Agent Webb called with one final request. Mrs. Hargrove, he said, we need you to attend the gala, in full, as his wife. A pause. We need you not to let him know anything is wrong. Can you do that? Claire looked at her reflection in the bedroom mirror, composed, still, certain. Yes, she said. I've been doing that for 3 years. 2 weeks before the gala, Claire Weston Hargrove woke at 3 in the morning and could not go back to sleep. This was not unusual. The 3rd trimester made sleep a negotiation. Her daughter was running out of room. She moved at night, pressed against ribs and organs, insistently present, as if she already knew the world was out there, waiting, and she was impatient to meet it. But this was different. This was not sleeplessness from discomfort. This was the kind of wakefulness that comes from the mind finally catching up to the body. The particular 3 a.m. that arrives when you have been managing something too large for too long, and your control slips briefly, and everything you have been organizing floods in at once. She lay in the dark bedroom, Douglas breathing 7 minutes into deep sleep on his side of the king-size bed, and she let herself think the thoughts she had been filing away, not about Douglas, about herself. Because here was the question she had not let herself ask. Not to Agent Webb, not to Sandra, not to Nora, not even to her mother. The question she had been stepping around for weeks like a crack in ice. Who am I? Not who am I without Douglas. That was the easy version. She was Claire Weston, former environmental consultant, competent and intelligent, and more than capable of rebuilding. That version she could handle. The deeper version was harder. The deeper version. Who was I before I started making myself smaller? Because it hadn't started with Douglas. That was the thing she had been circling. It hadn't started the day she moved to San Francisco, or the day she sold the orange couch, Or the day she let Margaret Harlow shake her hand and say, "We'll keep a place for you, come back when you're ready," and she had smiled and walked out the door. It started earlier. It started the first time she had looked at her own ambition, her own desires, her own life, and thought, is this too much? Am I too much? She had been 26, first real job, a supervisor who made it clear that women who pushed too hard were difficult, and she had learned, quietly, gradually, how to file down her own edges, how to make herself convenient. Douglas had not created that. He had just exploited it. He had found the existing wound and pressed. She lay in the dark and thought, I made it easy for him. She thought, I have been apologizing for existing since I was 26 years old. She thought, my daughter is not going to learn that from me. She got up. She did not turn on a light. She moved through the dark house by memory, down the hall, down the stairs, to the kitchen. She filled a glass of water. She sat at the kitchen table. The city was quiet. 3:15 in the morning, the particular silence of a city that hasn't woken yet, the hour that belongs to insomniacs, and the grieving and the about to be born. Somewhere along the way, she said quietly to the dark, I became invisible, not because anyone erased me, because I kept stepping back until there was nothing left to see. She set her hands flat on the table. She breathed. She thought about Marin, about what she wanted for her daughter. She wanted Marin to take up space, to have opinions and express them, and not feel, ever, that her presence required apology. To know that love, real love, did not require you to make yourself smaller to fit inside it. She wanted Marin to have an orange couch if she wanted an orange couch. She picked up her phone. She searched for apartments, not urgently, not desperately, almost tenderly. 2 bedrooms, good school district, natural light, a neighborhood with a coffee shop that might, eventually, learn her order. She saved 6 listings. She told no one. This was hers, the beginning of something that was entirely hers. She thought about the life she was walking toward, the work she would return to. She still had her certifications. She still had her network. Depleted by 3 years of Douglas's social world, but not gone. Margaret Harlow had sent her a card when she heard about the pregnancy. A real card, handwritten, that said, Claire, you were the best we ever had. The offer stands. She had cried over that card. She had hidden it behind the books on the reading room shelf so Douglas wouldn't ask about it. She thought, I have been hiding myself in this house, small acts of self-preservation, invisible because they had to be. She was done being invisible. She put her phone down. She went to the pantry. She found flour, butter, sugar, lemons, eggs. She baked. Her mother's lemon cake recipe, written on a 3x5 index card in Beverly's looping handwriting, carried in Claire's wallet since she was 22. She measured and mixed with quiet care, the kitchen filling with the smell of lemon and butter, the warmth of the oven at 4 in the morning. She did not think about Douglas, or the gala, or the FBI. She just baked. When the cake came out, she cut a slice while it was still warm. She ate it standing at the counter. She didn't need a plate. She didn't need to be proper about it. It tasted exactly like her childhood. Starting over feels impossible, she thought, but staying is worse. Starting over, she said again, quietly, to the dark, warm kitchen. That's not a setback. That's a direction. The next morning, Douglas came downstairs, saw the lemon cake on the counter, looked at it. You never bake, he said. She looked at him over her coffee cup. I used to, she said. He shrugged. He went back to his phone. She thought, that's the whole marriage in 2 sentences. Beverly Weston arrived on a Wednesday morning with 2 rolling suitcases, a carry-on, and the expression of a woman who has assessed a situation and made her decisions. She walked into the house. She looked around at the neutral tones, the untouched books, the art Douglas's decorator had chosen. Well, Beverly said, this is certainly a house. Yes, Claire said. It looks like a hotel lobby, Beverly said. Yes, Claire said. Nothing in here looks like you, Beverly said. No, Claire said. Beverly set her bag down. She looked at her daughter. She held out her arms. Claire walked into them. She had not cried in 6 weeks, not properly. She had managed and organized and planned and held herself together with extraordinary discipline, because falling apart had not been an option. She cried now, standing in the lobby hotel living room, in her mother's arms, 32 years old and 8 months pregnant and wearing yesterday's clothes. She cried quietly and without drama, but she cried fully, for Portland, for Margaret Harlow, for the orange couch, for the woman who had looked at Douglas Hargrove across a restaurant table and thought, this is the one, for that woman who had not known any better, who had done her best with what she understood at the time. Beverly held her, without speaking. She stroked her daughter's hair the way she had when Claire was 7, and 8, and 10, and every age she had needed it. When it was over, Claire pulled back, wiped her face with the back of her hand. Okay, she said. Okay, Beverly said. I'm all right, Claire said. I know you are, Beverly said. I have a plan, Claire said. I know you do, Beverly said. Tell me. So she told her everything. All of it. The FBI, the financial crimes, Sandra, the gala, the sequence. Beverly listened with complete attention, without interrupting, filing everything precisely. When Claire finished, Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that man sat at my Thanksgiving table for 3 years. Yes, Claire said. He told me I was raising a remarkable woman. A pause. I should have asked him what he meant by that. Mom. Because to him, remarkable meant useful, Beverly said. That's what he thought of you. Yes, Claire said. That was his loss, Beverly said. She said it with finality. The finality of a woman who has lived enough life to know the difference between a setback and an ending, complete and absolute loss. And now he gets to live with the consequences. Claire almost smiled. I have 2 weeks, she said. Then let's make sure they count, Beverly said. The following day, Claire did something she had not expected to do. She called Douglas's mother. Evelyn Hargrove was 71, patrician, the kind of woman who wore silk scarves to casual lunches. She and Claire had never been close. Claire had always felt, in Evelyn's presence, slightly inadequate. But Evelyn had sent a gift basket when Claire announced the pregnancy. Hand-selected, beautifully wrapped, a card in her sharp, slanted handwriting. I hope this child knows how loved she is. She called because she thought, Evelyn should know, before everything changes. Evelyn answered. They talked for 22 minutes. Claire did not tell her about the FBI or the fraud. She told her only that she and Douglas were separating, that the baby was healthy, that she planned to stay in the Bay Area. There was a long silence. Then Evelyn said, I never told you how to keep my son. I am going to tell you now. Don't. Claire blinked. He is, in many ways, his father's son, Evelyn said. And his father was... A weighted pause. Not a good husband. I stayed for 31 years because that is what my generation did. I have regretted it every day since I was 43. Claire held the phone, very still. You have your mother's backbone, Evelyn said. Use it. Thank you, Evelyn, Claire said. Name the baby whatever you want, Evelyn said. Don't let Douglas choose. I already have a name, Claire said. Marin. A pause. That's a good name, Evelyn said, and Claire thought she heard something in her voice, something under the silk scarf and the table-setting opinions, something that had been waiting there for 31 years. That same week, she met with Agent Webb for the final briefing. At the end of the meeting, she said, "I need you to know something." Webb waited. "I'm not doing this for justice," she said. "Not for the charges or what it means for the investigation." She met his eyes. "I'm doing this so my daughter never has to sit across a table from a man like him and wonder if she deserves better. She does. I know that now." Webb said, "She's lucky to have you." Claire said, "We're lucky to have each other." The week before the gala, she did three things for herself. First, she accepted Margaret Harlow's offer. She sent an email that took 14 minutes to write and 14 seconds to send. She was not ready to return full-time. Marin was coming in 3 weeks, but she accepted the offer. She set a start date. She sat with the weight of it for a long time. It felt like picking up something she had set down in a hurry and finding it exactly where she left it. Second, she bought the orange couch. She went back to the resale site. The listing was still there, slightly different from the one she remembered, but the same spirit. Warm and impractical, and not at all what you would put in a hotel lobby living room. She paid the deposit. She arranged delivery to a storage unit rented under her maiden name. It would go in the apartment that would be hers. Third, the night before the gala, she ironed her midnight blue gown herself. Not the household staff, not the dry cleaner, just her, with the ironing board in the reading room. Each pass of the iron deliberate, the fabric warming under her hands. She was preparing herself, not for a performance, the opposite of a performance. She was preparing to be, finally, entirely herself in a room full of people who had been pretending for years, and she was the only one who knew what she knew. That knowledge felt, for the first time, like power. The morning of the gala, a text from Agent Webb arrived at 7:14. "Everything is in place. All 140 agents confirmed. Building secured. Operation begins at 9 p.m. And then, separately. You don't have to do this. Say the word, and we execute regardless." She stared at that text for a long time. Then she typed back, "I'll be there." Beverly was in the guest room, dressed and ready 3 hours early, which was Beverly's way. Sandra had texted at 2 in the afternoon. "Everything in place. Papers will be served at 9 a.m. tomorrow." Nora had driven up from Palo Alto and was waiting at a hotel 4 blocks from the Caldwell Grand Ballroom. Agent Dana Sutton called at noon. "How are you?" she asked. "Honest answer," Claire said. "Always," Sutton said. "Terrified and ready," Claire said. "In equal parts." "That's exactly where you should be," Sutton said. A pause. "I want you to know something. In 4 months of being embedded in your husband's circle, I watched him in operation. I watched how he treats people, how he treats women, specifically." She paused again. "You are getting out of something that would have hurt you badly, maybe already has." "Yes," Claire said. "The arm he raised at last year's foundation dinner," Sutton said carefully. "The security footage. He put it down, but he's done it before." Claire closed her eyes. "I know," she said. "Tonight will be different," Sutton said. "Tonight he has an audience he's not expecting." The ritual of dressing. She had done it hundreds of times for Douglas's events. Shower, hair, makeup that said polished, but not trying. The gown, the jewelry Douglas preferred, understated, classic, the kind that said wife of rather than herself. Tonight she did it differently. She did her hair the way she used to in Portland. Less precise, a little looser. She used the lipstick she liked, a shade Douglas had once called too much, and she wore her grandmother's pearl earrings instead of the diamond set Douglas had given her on their first anniversary. The earrings were her grandmother's. The grandmother Marin was named for, small and real, and hers. She looked at herself in the mirror. She thought, there you are. There was the woman from Portland, the woman who had been a consultant, not a wife, the woman who had an orange couch and books she had actually read and a coffee shop where they knew her order. She was still there. She had always been there. She had just been very quiet for a while. Beverly came to the bedroom doorway. She watched Claire finish getting ready. Neither of them spoke for a minute. Beverly crossed the room and adjusted Claire's collar, the way she used to fix her daughter's school uniform 30 years ago. Then she cupped Claire's face in both hands, briefly, the way you do with something precious. You look like yourself, Beverly said. Good, Claire said. That was all. They went downstairs. Douglas was in the entry hall. Perfect as always, dark suit. Correct tie. Watch catching the light. He looked at Claire, and she saw the small, automatic calculation. Assessment, approval, note for later. She watched him and felt nothing, not love, not hate, not even contempt. Just clarity. Just, I see you now. You changed your hair, he said. Yes, she said. He looked at the earrings. Those aren't the diamonds. No, she said. Something moved briefly across his face. He had a talent for sensing shifts in atmosphere. She watched him decide it was nothing. File it away. A small note of discomfort he would return to later. Except there was no later. Not for him. Not in the way he was expecting. Ready? He said. Completely, she said. The car arrived. In the car, Douglas was on his phone. Always on his phone. She sat beside him and watched the city pass the window. San Francisco lit up at night, the bay visible between buildings, the bridge cables traced in light. She thought, last time in a car with him. Last time in a gown she chose to please him. Last time pretending. She pressed her hand to her belly. Her daughter kicked once. Firm. Decisive. I know, Claire thought. Me too. The Caldwell Grand Ballroom was everything it always was. 400 people in formal attire, string quartet, open bar, chandeliers casting everything in warm gold. The Foundation's mission statement displayed on 2 screens. Clean water, sustainable futures, community first. Claire had written those words. She thought about that. Her words on his screens, her work threaded through events that had been used to move stolen money. Her name on the invitations, her organizational systems, her professional competence, harnessed in service of a crime she hadn't known she was committing. She thought, I will not be complicit in this for one more day after tonight. She moved through the room with Douglas. The practiced performance, his hand at her lower back, her smile, the greetings, the small talk. She had done this 20 times. She knew her role. But tonight, she was also watching. She recognized Agent Sutton across the room. Dana Voss, laughing with a group of guests. Extraordinary, completely natural. No tells. Claire had been studying tells for 3 years, and she could not find one. She recognized 3 other people she had been introduced to at Foundation events over the years, always as investors, consultants, industry contacts. They were all, she realized, FBI. She thought, they've been here this whole time. She thought, I was the only person in this room who didn't know. Standing by the bar, while Douglas talked to a senator across the room, Claire said quietly to herself, starting over feels impossible, but staying is worse. She took a sip of sparkling water. Starting over, she said again, that's not a setback. That's a direction. At 8:45, she felt Douglas's hand at her elbow. Come, he said, low, private. She turned. His face was tight, the jaw she knew, the flat eyes she knew. She had said something, speaking to Senator Marsh about the water initiative, the specific language about protected aquifers, words she had written herself for the Foundation's materials. and apparently she had encroached on Douglas's announcement. She saw it building. She had seen it build before. 3 times in 3 years she had seen this particular sequence in Douglas's face, and she had stepped back, made herself smaller, apologized, diffused. Not tonight. She stood exactly where she was. She kept her hands on her daughter, and she let him come. He stepped toward her. His right arm began to rise. And in that moment, Claire Weston Hargrove made a decision she had been making, in small, quiet ways, for 3 years. She stood still. She did not flinch. She did not step back. She stood in the center of the Caldwell Grand Ballroom, and she looked at her husband and she thought, "This ends now." His arm went up. Not a wave, not a gesture, an arm drawn back with the economy of intention. The room did not hold its breath. The room did not know. The string quartet played. The chandeliers glittered. 400 people talked and laughed and touched their champagne flutes together and did not yet know that the floor was about to open beneath them. Douglas Hargrove, 45 years old, $4.3 billion on paper, raised his right hand toward his pregnant wife, and Dana Sutton's voice cut across the room. FBI. The word was a key turning in a lock. 140 voices joined it. The room became all motion, not chaos, precision. The way something practiced looks effortless. Credentials appeared from evening bags, jacket pockets, beneath cummerbunds. Gold and navy. Held open at chest height in the chandelier light, 140 people who had been standing in that room all evening, drinking sparkling water instead of champagne, waiting for this exact word. Douglas's arm dropped. Claire watched his face. She watched the processing. It was extraordinary. She could see it moving through him. Confusion, then the specific quality of recognition that comes right before full understanding. His eyes moved around the room, from the credentials to the agents, to Dana Sutton and approaching from the left, to the exit that was no longer an exit. He turned to Claire. She looked back at him. His face asked a question she could read clearly. How long? Her face gave him the answer. Long enough. Douglas Hargrove. Agent Marcus Webb was crossing the room now. Steady, unhurried. You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Douglas said nothing. He was watching Claire. She held his gaze. She thought, I used to be afraid of you. She thought, I don't know what I was afraid of. She thought, you are very small. The handcuffing was quiet. Douglas did not shout. He did not resist. He went with the controlled stillness of a man who has calculated every situation and decided that this, right now, is the position that serves him best. Stay quiet. Get to the lawyers. Say nothing. She had expected to feel something watching this. She felt still, not happy, not triumphant, not even relieved exactly, just still, the particular stillness of a storm that has passed. She thought, he is going to spend years in this, in lawyers and hearings and the specific grinding exposure of a federal case. He is going to have to stand in rooms and answer questions and be seen, accurately, for what he is. She did not need to witness it. She had already seen it. Agent Sutton appeared at her elbow. Mrs. Hargrove, she said quietly, are you all right? Claire felt her daughter kick, one firm, decisive kick, right beneath her ribs, as if weighing in. Yes, she said. I think I finally am. In the middle of the gala, becoming something else, the music stopping, the voices of law enforcement filling the space where the string quartet had been, Claire walked to the edge of the room, not to flee, just to find a moment of air. She stood near the tall windows, looking out at the San Francisco night, the bay visible between buildings, the bridge a line of lights in the dark. She put both hands on her belly. The room was loud behind her. She stood, in the noise, and felt, clearly and completely, the particular silence inside herself. She said, to no one, "It's over." And it was. Agent Webb found her at the window. "Are you ready to go?" he asked. "In a minute," she said. He stood beside her, not intrusively, just present. "2 years," she said. "That's how long you've been building this." 26 months, he said. "And he never knew," she said. "He underestimated us," Webb said. A pause. "He underestimates the people around him, consistently." She looked at him. "That's how he lost," she said. "That's exactly how he lost," he said. She turned from the window. Nora was crossing the room toward her. How Nora had gotten into the ballroom was a question for another day. But there she was, in her green dress, her face a mixture of relief and barely contained triumph. Arms already open, Claire walked into them. "You did it," Nora said. "We did it," Claire said. "You and my mother and Sandra and Agent Webb." You," Nora said firmly. She pulled back and looked at Claire's face. "You stayed. You gathered evidence. You cooperated. You stood there in this room and let him show who he was one last time so no one would ever doubt it again." A pause. "That was all you." Beverly appeared from a side entrance. She had come with Nora. They had coordinated without telling Claire, because Beverly had wanted to be there and Nora had made it happen. Beverly walked up to her daughter and looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "You look exactly like your grandmother." Claire thought about Marin, about the name she had chosen, about the earrings she was wearing tonight. "Good," she said. Later in the car, a different car, not Douglas's town car, Claire sat in the back seat with Beverly beside her, and Nora in the front. She looked out at the city, San Francisco at night, still beautiful. She thought about the morning that was coming, the divorce papers, the calls she would have to make, the conversations, the apartment search, the return to work that felt not like a defeat or a consolation prize, but like something she had always been walking back to and had simply taken a detour. She thought about Marin, 17 days until the due date, 17 days until the whole world changed again, in the other direction this time, in the direction of something being added rather than something being taken away. She thought about the orange couch in the storage unit, waiting. She thought about all the things she was about to discover about herself. She put her hands on her belly. She said silently, "Almost, baby girl, almost time." The next morning, Sandra served the divorce papers at 7:15 a.m. Douglas was in a federal holding facility. He received them through his attorney. His attorney called Sandra at 9 a.m. "My client would like to negotiate," the attorney said. "Your client is not in a negotiating position," Sandra said. Then she hung up. Then she called Claire. "It's done," Sandra said. "Good," Claire said. Then she called her mother and asked if she wanted to go look at apartments. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in the Coal Valley neighborhood. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, 2 bedrooms, one for Claire, one for Marin. A kitchen with a window that caught afternoon light. And in the living room, a space that was exactly, to the inch, large enough for an orange couch. She stood in the empty living room and turned slowly. The realtor was saying things about square footage and proximity to the park and the quality of the public school 3 blocks away. Claire was not listening to the realtor. She was listening to the apartment, listening for whether it felt, in her body, the way the word home felt. It did. She said yes on the spot. The move happened in stages. From the house, a marriage's worth of accumulated objects, most of which she didn't want. She took her books. She took the clothes she had brought from Portland that she had mostly stopped wearing. She took the contents of the reading room, including the small blue filing box, where she had kept her notes on the fraud for 6 weeks. She left the art. She left the furniture. She left the neutral tones and the perfectly calibrated surfaces and the $12,000 table. She left the bed she had never thought of as hers. The orange couch arrived on a Tuesday. The delivery men carried it up 3 flights of stairs. They set it in the living room, exactly where she pointed. It was warmer than the old one, a slightly deeper shade of amber. It had lived somewhere before this, in someone else's story. And it had good bones. She sat on it. She sank into the cushions the way you sink into something that was waiting for you. Beverly was standing in the kitchen making tea. "Is it what you wanted?" she called. Claire looked around the living room. Late afternoon light crossing the hardwood floor. Her books on the shelves she had bought secondhand. Marin's room. Visible through the doorway, waiting with the furniture Nora had helped her choose. The small warm crib. The mobile Beverly had assembled with her reading glasses on and her brow furrowed in concentration. "Yes," Claire said, "it's exactly what I wanted." The custody arrangement took 4 months to finalize. Douglas was, by then, facing federal charges on 7 counts. His legal team was occupied elsewhere. He agreed, through attorneys, to the terms Sandra had set. Primary custody with Claire. Supervised visitation pending the outcome of the criminal proceedings. Significant child support. The full documentation of the financial crimes kept separate from any marital assets claim. Douglas Hargrove spent the following 2 years being publicly, thoroughly, and professionally exposed. The investors he had defrauded were repaid through seized assets. The foundation was dissolved. 3 associates received federal sentences. The story ran on the front page of the business section on a Tuesday morning. Claire saw it on her phone while nursing Marin on the orange couch. She looked at the headline. She looked at Douglas's photograph. Then she looked at Marin. Marin was 11 weeks old. She had her mother's eyes, the specific gray-green that Beverly always called stormlight. She had a very small, very precise mouth that she pursed when concentrating. She was concentrating now on the business of being fed. Claire looked at her daughter and felt, cleanly and completely, the thing that had been waiting for her on the other side of all of it. Not triumph, not vindication, just love. Just this. Just morning light on hardwood floors and her daughter in her arms on an orange couch in a room that was entirely hers. She put the phone away. She reached for her phone once to text Nora about the headline, then stopped. She looked at Marin. She put the phone on the cushion beside her, face down. Not because she was hiding from anything, because what was in front of her was more interesting than anything on a screen. She went back to work when Marin was 4 months old. Part-time at first, Margaret Harlow had held the position, genuinely held it, because Margaret Harlow meant what she said and said only what she meant. Claire came back to her field slowly, like walking back into a room she had left in a hurry and finding everything arranged as she had left it. The version of herself who could sit across from oil company lawyers and not blink. That woman had been there the whole time, a little quieter, a little dusty, absolutely intact. She blinked back to life fast. Her colleagues noticed, not the return itself. They had expected that. What they noticed was the particular quality of her attention, the way she moved through meetings. She had always been good. But there was a certainty to her now that had not been there before. A woman who knows exactly what she is worth takes up space differently. She took up space differently. The moment she understood it was truly over came on a Thursday evening, 4 months after the gala. A benefit, a small one, a water rights organization she had worked with before Douglas. Invited because of her returning profile in the field. She was there without Maren, who was at home with Beverly for the night. She was talking to a colleague, a man named Robert Finch, who had been in environmental law for 20 years and who talked about water table data with the same enthusiasm other people reserved for sports scores. She had always liked Robert Finch. She had stopped seeing him at events after she married Douglas because Douglas found conversations about water tables tedious. She was talking to Robert Finch about an aquifer restoration project in the Central Valley when she felt it. A particular kind of stillness. She turned. Douglas was across the room. She had not known he would be there. His lawyers had negotiated continued movement pending trial. He was there with 2 attorneys, the slightly diminished version of his usual performance. The suit was still perfect, but something in the bearing had changed. The particular quality of a man whose floor has been removed. He saw her, their eyes met across the room, and she waited for it. She had expected this moment for months. The old gravity, the old pull, or the old pain, or the old rage, or the old love, or any of the things that had made up 3 years of her life. She felt none of them. She felt nothing. Not the nothing of numbness, not the nothing of suppression, the clear, clean, transparent nothing of something that is simply over. A door she had walked through and closed behind her, and had no intention of walking back through. He was just a man across a room. Small, careful, someone she used to know. She turned back to Robert Finch and picked up the conversation exactly where she had left it. "You were saying about the aquifer in Fresno County," she said. "Right, yes," Robert said. "The recovery rate over the last 3 years has actually been—" And she listened, genuinely, with the whole of her attention. After the benefit, Claire drove home. The Bay Bridge lit up against the dark water. She drove in silence. No music, no podcast, no voice in her ear. Just the city moving past the windows and the particular texture of late evening in San Francisco. She thought about nothing in particular. She was just present. She was just driving home, and home was hers. The thought landed with the quiet force of something true. She arrived home at 10:30. Beverly was in the living room on the orange couch, reading, Maren asleep in her arms. The apartment was warm and soft and lit, the way a room looks when someone has been caring for it. Claire stood in the doorway. Beverly looked up. "Good event?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Claire said. "Douglas was there," Beverly said. It was not a question. Beverly always knew. "Yes," Claire said. Beverly looked at her, reading her the way she always could, looking for damage. She found none. "Okay?" Beverly asked. "Better than okay," Claire said. She crossed the room. She sat on the couch beside her mother. She leaned in carefully and looked at her daughter, Maren, sleeping in the secure geography of her grandmother's arms, stormlight eyes closed, small, precise mouth softened in sleep. She was the most complete thing Claire had ever seen. She put her finger in Maren's small, curled fist. Maren held on. Later, after Beverly had gone to bed and Maren was in her crib, Claire sat alone on the orange couch. The apartment was quiet. The city moved outside the windows. San Francisco, at midnight. The particular soft energy of a city that never completely sleeps. Someone laughing on the street below. A car passing. The ordinary music of a neighborhood at midnight. She thought about the woman who had stood in a ballroom 6 months ago with her hands on her belly and her husband's arm rising and 140 FBI agents waiting for the right word. She thought about the woman who had stood at a Portland window 3.5 years ago and said yes, she would move. Yes, she would build her life around his. She thought about the woman who had sold an orange couch. She thought about the woman sitting on this couch right now. They were all the same woman. That was the thing no one told you. The before and the during and the after, they were not separate people. The woman who made the mistake and the woman who survived it and the woman who emerged from it were the same continuous person, learning, accumulating, growing, not in spite of the pain, but through it and past it and out the other side, where the light was different, clearer, more accurate. She was not starting over. She was continuing. Just more accurately, more completely, with all of herself present and accounted for and refusing to be filed away or made convenient or apologized for. The prison door had been unlocked the whole time, she thought. I was my own jailer. She set her hand on the armrest of the orange couch. She said, very quietly, to the empty room, "Not anymore." She looked at the bookshelf. Her books. Books she had actually read. A ceramic pot on the windowsill. She had bought it at a farmer's market 2 weeks ago, just because she liked it. The impractical, warm terracotta. The small, succulent, sitting in it like it had always been there. Just because she liked it. She thought, when is the last time I did something just because I liked it? She thought, Marin will do things just because she likes them. Because she will grow up in a house where that is allowed, where that is the standard, where the question is not, will this please someone else, but does this please you? She closed her eyes. She thought about Margaret Harlow's card. You were the best we ever had. The offer stands. She would be back in the field in 6 weeks, working on water rights cases again. Real work. Hers. The kind of work she used to lie awake excited about, before she learned to lie awake managing a silence instead. She thought about the apartment, about the mornings to come, Beverly flying back to Portland next week. Her mother had her own life, her own home, her garden, and her book club, and the neighbor's dog she pretended not to love, but flying back knowing her daughter was okay. Better than okay. Rooted in something true, she thought about Marin, about the world Marin was going to step into, about all the things Claire was going to teach her, not by instruction, but by example. The example of a woman who made mistakes and looked at them honestly, who stayed longer than she should have, but then left, who built something after. You don't have to be afraid, she would tell Marin someday, not with words, with how she lived, how she would tell Marin, I knew from the beginning, deep down, but I chose hope over instinct for longer than I should have. And then I chose myself. And that is not a defeat. That is not a story about a woman who failed. That is a story about a woman who learned and stood up and walked toward the thing that was actually hers. The orange couch, the gray-green eyes, the stormlight, the life that was hers. She opened her eyes. The lamp was warm. The street was quiet. The city hummed its midnight hum. Marin slept in the next room, arms spread wide in that particular way of sleeping infants. Completely open, completely trusting, completely unafraid. I know who I am, Claire thought. I always knew. I just needed to stop apologizing for it. She put her hand on the armrest of the orange couch, felt the warm, nubby fabric under her palm. She sat with herself in her own space, on her own terms, in her own life. Fully and finally, her own life. And then, because it was late, and Marin would be awake by 6, and tomorrow she had a call with Margaret Harlow about the Central Valley Project. She reached over and turned off the lamp. The room went soft and dark. Outside, the city breathed. Claire Weston, not Weston Hargrove, not anymore, just Weston, just herself, just the woman she had always been, sat for one more moment in the warm dark, and let herself feel it, all of it, the whole of it. The grief, the relief, the loss, the finding. She let it be exactly as large as it was, and then she got up. She walked down the hall. She looked in on Marin. Some the small shape in the crib, the rise and fall of that tiny chest, the perfect particular smell of her daughter's hair. She stood there for a moment. Then she went to her room. Her room. She lay down in her own bed, in her own apartment, in the life she was building with her own hands. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she slept.
There's a moment in Claire's story that most people will remember: the ballroom, the badges, the 400 guests who turned out to be federal agents. It's dramatic. It's cinematic. It almost feels too perfect to be real. But here's what I want you to hold on to. The real story didn't happen in that ballroom. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning, in a quiet kitchen, with a cup of cold coffee and a woman who finally stopped pretending she didn't know what she already knew. That is where courage lives. Not in the dramatic moment, is the small, private one, the one where no one is watching, the one where you say out loud or just to yourself something is wrong. And this time, I am going to listen. Claire's story is not really a story about a bad man. There are bad men everywhere, and their stories are not the important ones. Claire's story is about what happens inside a woman when she chooses hope over instinct. Again and again, because she wants to believe, because she loves, because she has invested so much that the cost of leaving feels larger than the cost of staying. We all know this feeling. Maybe not in a marriage, maybe in a friendship, job, a version of ourselves we've outgrown but are afraid to let go of. We all have a room we've stayed in too long because leaving meant admitting we were wrong to enter. But here's the truth Claire teaches us. Admitting you were wrong is not a defeat. It is not a failure. It is one of the bravest things a human being can do, because it requires you to look at yourself honestly. Not the story you told, not the version you showed the world, but the real you, who knew, who sensed, who felt the temperature drop long before anyone else. And then there is Marin, Claire's daughter, born into chaos, raised in clarity. The most powerful line in this entire story isn't the arrest. It isn't the FBI badges. It isn't even Claire's quiet, "I think I finally am." It's the last thing Claire says, not out loud, but to herself, alone on that orange couch at midnight. Marin will do things just because she likes them, because she will grow up in a house where that is allowed. And that is what survival looks like when it becomes legacy. Not just saving yourself, but breaking the cycle, building something different, raising a daughter who never has to unlearn what her mother had to. Every woman who walks away from something that diminishes her is not just saving herself, she is building a different world for the next generation. The prison door was unlocked the whole time. That line will stay with me, because it's true for almost all of us. We are not trapped by our circumstances as much as we are trapped by our own stories about our circumstances, by the meaning we assign to staying, by the fear of what leaving says about us. But leaving doesn't say you failed. Leaving says, I choose myself. I choose truth. I choose a life that is actually mine, even if it's smaller, harder, less glamorous than the one I imagined, even if it costs me everything I thought I wanted, even if it means starting over at the worst possible time. Claire started over at 8 months pregnant, alone, with no house, no job in place, no clear plan. And she built something real, because real is what lasts. Real is what you can stand on. Real is what you can look at in the mirror and recognize. So here is what I want you to take with you today. Trust the quiet knowing. The thing your body has been telling you that your mind has been too kind to confirm. Make the list, even when it's 2 a.m. and the house is dark and you're the only one awake. Make the list, because As long as you're still thinking, you're still in control. And remember, you are not starting over. You are continuing more accurately, more completely, with all of yourself present. That is not a small thing. That is everything. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually crafted by our team with the sole intention of bringing you stories that carry meaning, lessons that last, and words that remind you of who you truly are.